You're turning there, just a little update. Brother Heidenreich, he's out of surgery, back home, and that's good. The surgery went well. It's just he had a little complication from the last surgery, and that's why they had to go back in today. And I called him this afternoon. He sounded a little drunk. I said, "Dad, were you in church or did you get drunk?" He was slurring his speech a little bit, and from the medication. And he says, "No, I may do that tonight," but he didn't do that. He did have surgery, and so pray for his healing. The doctor told him to take it easy for 30 days. Anyway, Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. Once you've found it, let's all stand as we read the Word of God. We're going to read verse 22. Genesis chapter 1, verse 22. Brother Flores, that's the first book in the Bible. Miss Beth, can you help your husband find that? Genesis chapter 1, verse 22, just one verse tonight. Notice what it says. And God what? Blessed them, saying, here it is. Notice these next two words. Be what? Fruitful. And what? Multiply. And what? Fill the waters in the seas. And let fowl what? Multiply in the earth. I want to take this verse tonight. I want to talk to you where God's blessing is found. Where God's blessing is found. Father, take these next few minutes and allow me to be a help to thy people. I pray that we'd walk out of this place understanding where your blessing is found. There's no secret. It's not something you've hid. It's right there in front of us. I pray that you'd help us now in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Have you ever heard somebody say about somebody else, God's hand is on their life? When we say that about somebody, we are saying God is blessing them. What they touch, God's using. Everything they touch turns to gold. I think of a good friend of mine. I was talking to my pastor years ago, and my pastor said about this preacher friend, he says, everything he touches turns to gold. What he was saying God's blessing is on his life. God was using him in a mighty way. I would dare say, if I went through this room tonight and did a little survey tonight, I'd dare say that every person under my voice wants God's blessing on their life. I don't think you'd be in church on a Sunday night if you didn't want God's blessing on your life. Who wouldn't want it? Since I was a teenage boy, I always wanted God's blessings on my life. I would read stories about men from the past, and I'd see how God blessed their ministries. And it created a desire, a great desire in my heart for God to bless my life. Follow me very carefully. I read about D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody pastored a large church in the Chicagoland area. He was saved by, get this now, by a Sunday school teacher. Sunday school teachers never underestimate your power upon someone's life. Most of the great men that God has used were influenced or saved because of a Sunday school teacher. And it was D.L. Moody. He'd be what we would call a bus kid. He was not. No one was bringing him to church. And his Sunday school teacher, Mr. Kimball, got him to church. And Mr. Kimball led him to Christ and cared for him. And get this now. And God touched D.L. Moody's life. And he heard a man make the statement, the world has yet to see what God can do with one man wholly committed to him. And D.L. Moody said, I want to be that man. He said, I want to be that man that God would use. God began to bless in D.L. Moody's life, and if you read the story, it was probably the great Chicago fire that really kind of turned things around in his ministry. He was already having great crowds come in his ministry, but he would not give an invitation every night. By the way, that's why we ought to give an invitation. We don't know what's going to happen the next day. One night, he had preached that night, and several people were lost. He gave the plan of salvation. He was planning on giving the invitation at the end of the week, as was the custom was in that day. But that night, the great Chicago fire happened. That night, several of the people, hundreds of people died that night in the great Chicago fire. And several of the people that were in that auditorium died in that fire, and it broke his heart. He went to England to get away to be with the preacher friend there. And while he was there at that preacher friend heard that he was in town and said, would you come preach? And D.L. Moody said, no, I didn't come to preach. I came to get away. I have to get my thoughts back together. And finally, his preacher friend, he begged him until he was embarrassed. And finally, D.L. Moody preached that night. He preached that morning, and he was going to come back that night and preach that night. What he didn't realize was there's a lady there in that church. That lady went home that afternoon and told her sister, who was an invalid, and said, you're not going to believe who preached in our church this morning. And the invalid lady said, who? She said, D.L. Moody. And she said, and the invalid lady said, you mean the Mr. Moody from Chicago? The Mr. Moody we read about in the papers, a great preacher from Chicago? And that invalid lady said, would you close the door? Shut the door. She says, don't let anybody in. Don't bring me any food. She goes, I want to fast and pray this afternoon that God would use D.L. Moody. That invalid lady who could not get out of bed, prayed all afternoon long into the evening that God would bless his ministry. Get this now. That night, D.L. Moody said, I stood up to preach. He said, my heart was still as cold as it was that morning. He said, I did not want to be there, but I preached. And he said, something happened that night. He said, I said to the people, he says, now if you want to get saved, would you raise your hand? He said, to my surprise, I couldn't believe how many hands were raised. He said, I thought they were mocking me. He said, put your hands down. He reworded the invitation. He says, now if you really want to get saved, more hands are raised the second time than what was raised the first time. He says, you all don't understand what I'm talking about. He reworded the invitation, and he said, if you really want to get saved, you come tomorrow night, and I'll tell you how to get saved. They came the next night. They said more people were there the next night than what was there that Sunday night, and that was the night that the great revivals in D.L. Moody's ministry started. Why? Because a little invalid lady. I read that story as a young man. I read the story how God blessed him, where hundreds of thousands of souls were saved. Over 1 million people, they say, were saved in his ministry. And as a young man, my heart had a desire. What are God's blessings on my life like D.L. Moody had? I read the stories of J. Frank Norris. Heard how J. Frank Norris pastored 2 great churches at the same time. One in Fort Worth, Texas, other in Detroit, Michigan. Both churches were several thousand people in attendance. Get this now. This was not in the modern day of a jet plane where you can jump on and just kind of go back and forth. He would go to one church for a couple weeks, come back to the other church for a couple weeks. He would pastor both churches, and God used J. Frank Norris to be able to bring a great revival in America. And I read that story, and I'd say, oh God, could that be for me? God, could you give me your blessings like you gave D.L. Moody? Could you give me your blessings like you gave to J. Frank Norris? I read this. I knew Dr. Lee Robertson, of course, born in the ministry there, and watched his ministry closely. Dr. Lee Robertson pastored the Highland Park Baptist Church, and about 8,000 every Sunday in church. Hundreds of people saved every week. Packed the auditoriums out. Can I tell you, I'd hear about Lee Robertson's ministry, and I'd go, my dad and I would travel to go hear Dr. Robertson preach whenever he was in driving distance. And as a young boy, I'd see Dr. Robertson preaching. He was not what you would call a pulpiteer. He was a man of God. I'd watch Dr. Robertson preach, and I'd sit there as a young teenage boy, and I'd say, God, I'd love to have your hand of blessings on me like it's on that man up there. Remember, as a young boy, I sat in the old auditorium at First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana. We were about 1970, I think 1976, 1977. We lived in Hammond, Indiana for about a year in between ministries. I remember we'd always sit up on the preacher's right in the balcony, right up here. And I remember as a young boy, I'd see the crowds in that auditorium. And as a young boy, Brother Harjo, I said, God, I'd like to have that here in my life. God, I'd like to see God do something in my life. God allowed me to go back and work under his ministry for a while, and I'd see the blessings. And as a young teenage boy, before I got back and started working under his ministry, I would read these stories, and I'd read stories of great missionaries. And I'd say, oh God, could I have the blessings of my life like you gave to them. My heart burned. I don't understand. You have to understand me. I don't understand people that don't want to be used by God. I don't get it. I really don't. I'm talking to my Sunday night crowd. I don't get Sunday morning glories. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It doesn't compute up here. Because I've always had a burning desire in my heart. And I'd beg God and I'd say, God, I want to have your hand upon me. I was reading in Genesis 1, and God blessed them. This is creation. Saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas. And let fowl multiply in the earth. And all of a sudden it clicked. I don't have to beg God for his blessings. Listen to me. I do what it takes to get his blessings. You see, God's blessings, listen to me, it's not on somebody because there's someone special. Jack Hiles was no one special. Lee Robertson was no one special. D.L. Moody was no one special. J. Frank Norris was no one special. You name the man of God, they're no one special. What are they? They're a sinner saved by the grace of God. They're just like you and I. Brother Mills, you're just as much a man that God has created just like these great men are. I'm saying tonight, do you understand, Brother Ahmad? We look at these great men and say, wow, I wish I could have God's hand of blessing on me. You can. You can. You see, it's not that somebody's special. It's that what I've learned about these men is they found the secret was not in them being special. The secret was in them doing what it takes to get God's blessings, and that's why God blessed them. You see, the blessing is a result. We beg God. Say, God, could you bless me? God said, I would if you'd do something. Somebody help me out just a little bit. God, and God says, why do I need to bless you? You're not doing anything that needs my blessing yet. Somebody help me out. Why does he need to bless somebody who only comes on Sunday morning? Get this now. Why does God need to bless the church that's just playing church? You know why God's blessed Maranatha Baptist Church in the past year or so? Let me tell you why. Because we did what it takes to get God's power, and that's why God's been blessing this church in the past year. In the midst of a pandemic, God's been blessing this church. Is it because we're better than any other church? Well, I'm the pastor. I don't know. No, and let me tell you why God's looked down from heaven. God found a place. God says there's a place that's doing what deserves my blessing. They're doing what it takes to get my blessing. And God says, I think I'll choose to bless them. You see, we've got to understand this not about your talent. You say, I don't have the talent. You don't have to have the talent. Do you realize that D.L. Moody, I don't even think he graduated from high school. Did you get that? So many thought he was uneducated. Do you realize that there was one denomination wouldn't even ordain D.L. Moody because they said, well, you're uneducated. How do you think they felt? Dr. Jack Hiles got kicked out of the Southern Baptist movement. Dr. Lee Robertson got kicked out of the Southern Baptist movement. J. Frank Norris got kicked out of the... How do you think they feel? Now, listen to me. It's not about your talent. It's not about your charisma. Well, if I mimic Brother Domelle, then maybe I can. No, it's not about my charisma, and it's not about any talent that I may have. I don't know if I have any talent, but I know this. I do know I have a God. I do know if I do what God tells me to do, God says, okay, I'll bless that. It's not about our charisma. I have watched men throughout the years, Brother Turk, what I've watched throughout the years, there's men with flashy personalities, men that don't have personalities. There's men that are great pulpiteers. There's men that just stand behind the pulpit and preach, but there's something about when God's hand is upon them. It doesn't matter if they're dynamic or not dynamic. You can tell that God's hand is upon them. What is it? I tell you exactly what it is. is they just do what it takes to have God's blessings, and that's why God has his blessings on them. Well, if I just had his personality, I'll be honest with you, some of the guys with the best personalities are doing the worst jobs. I can think of a guy. I got to be careful because I hope they're not listening to this. I can think of a guy had Mr. Personality. I mean, Mr. Personality. Had everything. I mean, you get around him and he could win you over like that. Mr. Salesman. Could sell himself. I'd preach revival meetings for him, and I scratched my head and said, why? Why isn't he not? I mean, look at the personality that he has. Certainly that personality, certainly God could do. And you know why? Because he wasn't doing what it takes to get God's blessings. I had to go to somebody else's church that their personality is about as flashy as the bottom of my shoe. Reminded me of Brother Brad. I'm sorry, but anyway. Listen to me. Not a great person, but yet God would build their church. Now, what is it? I'll tell you exactly what it is. Somewhere, there's some people that say, you know what? I don't have to be special. There is no difference. God doesn't care the color of your skin. God doesn't care your education. God doesn't care about a lot of things that we care about. He says, I want to see somebody that says, I'll just do what God tells me to do and see if God can't do something through me. And God says, okay, I see somebody, they're doing it. Hey, I think I'm going to bless them. I was a young preacher boy. Been in the ministry for a few years. As an evangelist, walked in Brother Hiles' office. And I said, Brother Hiles, I want my ministry to get bigger. I said, what can I do to get my ministry bigger? He kind of sat back in his chair, crossed his arms. You have to know how he do that. When he sat back in his chair and crossed his arms, you knew, so you just shut up and listen for a little bit. He'd sit back and cross his arms like this, sit back in his chair, and he said, Brother Domelle, he says, I know you have a great desire. He says, what you need to do is just stay busy doing what you're already doing. Stop worrying about how big you get. He says, the guys that want to get big, he says, they'll compromise to get there. You just keep going soul winning. You keep praying. You keep walking with God. You keep doing what you're doing. And God knows your name. God knows your address. And when it's time, he'll bless you. Now, what did I do? I kept sowing. What did I do? I kept praying. What did I do? I kept reading the Bible. What did I do? I kept going to church. What did I do? I tried to live a clean life. You say, why? Because I want God to bless me. Have that desire. Can I tell you tonight, if I could get everybody under my church to have that blessing of God on their life, do you know what could happen in this area if we had people that had the hand of God blessing their life? Amen. Amen. God says, be fruitful. He says, multiply. He says, fill. Now, what does it take, preacher, to get God's blessings? If you're all good, I'll let you out early tonight, which means we're not going to get out early. What does it take to get God's blessings tonight? First of all, it takes desire. It's interesting that the very first day of creation, God established the principle of how to be blessed. Now listen to me. So if God established the principle on the first day of how to be blessed, then apparently it's not bad to have a desire for God to bless you. Now listen to me. I'd much rather have a desire for God to bless me than a desire for worldly success. Somebody help me out on that one right there. See, 111 times God uses the word desire in the King James Bible. Now, if God uses the word desire 111 times, then I would think having a desire for God to do something through you is something that God is interested in. By the way, God does know your desires. Yes, sir. Proverbs 18:1 says, through desire, a man having separated himself. What's God saying? He says desire causes you to separate from those things that would keep you from what you desire. Listen, so if I desire God's blessings, then desire will cause me to separate from the friends and the activities and the places and the groups and the television programs and the websites that would keep God from blessing me. Well, preacher, how do I get away from my crowd? Get desire. Get desire. There's no secret in life. Well, how does one overcome sin and the other doesn't? The one had desire, and they decided we're going to separate from that. Now listen to me. The reason why some of you struggle in your sin is because you don't have desire enough to get away from the friends who are influencing you from doing wrong.
That's right. Amen. That's right.
When someone says, I want to do right, but they don't change their friends, something's not right. Am I right on that, Brother Harjo? Brother Harjo got saved. He was a drunkard. Drug addict as well. Get this now. You know what he had to do? He had a desire to do right. You know what his preacher told him? His preacher said, you got to get away from the bad influences. You know what he did? The bad influences was, get this now, was his family. I don't know if Brother Richard, not you, of course not Brother Richard. You're a saint. I understand that. But he separated from his family until he could have the strength to be able to witness to his family. Now, most of his family is saved. Why? He had a desire. That desire was great enough to say, my family's not going to like me. I'm sure there was times his family probably said, oh, you think you're too good for us. You're going to that white man's church now. Right? But get this, they saw the change in his life. That gave him that opportunity to talk to them, and they started getting saved one by one by one. Why? Because there was a desire inside. You say, I want God to bless me. Okay, then what is it that's keeping you from seeing God's blessings on your life? You know, desire will wake you up early in the morning to spend time with God. Well, I'm just not a morning person. No, you're not a desire person.
That's right. That's it. Yeah. Preached up.
You think at 4:30 in the morning, I jump up out of bed? Oh, this is the day. This is the day that the Lord. I don't jump up. Oh, let me just do that. Let me raise my. No, I don't do that. I fall out of bed. Make a beeline for the coffee pot. Starbucks. This week I was flying back. It was early. I had to wake up at 2:30 in the morning to get to the airport. And it's on Wednesday morning, and I get to there's nothing open at 2:30 in the morning. I'm at the airport, and the only thing that opens up is Dunkin' Donuts. I hate Dunkin' Donuts coffee. That is what you call flavored water. I tried to get their strongest coffee. Listen to me. That was the poorest excuse for coffee I've ever tasted in my entire life. But I desire. I wanted coffee. Now listen, desire. So I get up. Why do you get up that time? Have desire to walk with my God so I can have his hand in my life. Listen to me. Hey, desire puts you to bed earlier at night so you can get up in the morning. It all comes down to right here. I can't change this. If I could, I would. I'd make Brother Harjo an Alabama fan. But I can't change that. That's okay. You can pull for the Devil's team. But anyway. Now listen to me. I can't change this. But I know who can. I know what it takes. How many times I wonder I've gone to someone's house and I said, now you listen to me, you got to do this. You know, I want them to get desire. I look at teenagers, and I looked at 2 teenagers this morning in my office, and I want God to use you, but I can't create the desire.
That's right. Amen.
What does it take for God's blessings on me? 1, it takes desire. 2, it takes action. Notice what he says. He says, be fruitful. That word be is action. He didn't say possess, he said be. Being fruitful means it takes action. You can sit all day long wanting God's blessings, but you'll never get it. I wonder how many of you went to Bible college, don't raise your hand, but went to Bible college, you graduated, went out and did something, but you saw people sit at home in that church, they're still sitting there today waiting for God to do something. You know why? They're not doing anything. At some point, there's got to be action. You've got to get out. You've got to do it.
Right. Amen.
I think of the 12 spies. 10 spies came back and said, let's go back home. They called Egypt home. 2 spies said, hogwash. That's just deep in the Hebrew. Hogwash. Let's go at once, possess the land. What were they saying? Hey, let's get some action. Get some action. They said, what do you mean go back home and sit there and eat the leeks and the garlics? Man, we want steak. We're tired of the leeks and the garlics. We want to go to the land that flows with milk and honey. We want to go to the land where God's blessings on us. Let's go forward at once. You don't sit and wait for God's blessings. You get active and discover God's blessings. So, what does it take? It takes desire. It takes action. Listen, that's why some of you need to start going soul winning.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
People say, why doesn't Domelle cancel soul winning? Because I want action. I want God's blessings. God's blessings is more important than anything else. Somebody help me out just a little bit. If I believe in a real hell, that's why I don't cancel soul winning.
Amen.
What's it take? Fruit. What does it take for God's blessings? Well, God says, okay. He says, let me see some desire. He says, let me see some action. Then he says, let me see some fruit. Get this now. We're producing fruit for something. Now, everything that God creates, he created to reproduce. Now, get this now. That's why we all need to be soul winners. Why? So we can get some fruit. I cannot reproduce myself till, first of all, somebody gets saved. Just because they get saved doesn't mean I'm bringing forth fruit. It means I just saw someone saved. Fruit is somebody going back out and doing what I'm doing. But that's the beginning process. Listen, yes, you got to have desire. Yes, you have to have action. But you've got to reproduce yourself in someone else and say, okay, let's make this happen. I've got to have some fruit that sends back out. So what does it take? Desire. What does it take? Action. What does it take? Fruit. To get this, what does it take? Continuation. Notice this. Be fruitful and. Circle the word and. Just draw a line to it. Continue. Continue. He didn't say be fruitful and stopped. He says be fruitful and. What does that mean? Okay, follow me. He's saying, okay, get desire, get action, start producing fruit. Once the fruit comes, continue to do what it takes to get your fruit. But then follow me carefully. He says be fruitful. Notice his next phrase. Be fruitful and what's the next word? Multiply. So he says, okay. He says, first, you gotta have what? Desire. Say it with me, you gotta have what? Desire. Then he says you need to turn that desire into what? action. And then make sure that while you're doing the action, you get some what? Fruit. Then once you get fruit, you got to what? Continue. Then what? Multiply. Multiply. He says, don't get this now. Don't stay at the same level you are. Get more of you. We started 2 more Sunday school classes today. We're up to 29 Sunday school classes. I told the Sunday school teachers I got 3 classes I want to start like right now. I want to start another ladies Sunday school class. I want to start a men's Sunday school class. And I want to start a single Sunday school class for those who are right out of Bible or right out of college or right out of high school. Right out of high school. I want a place for those who get out of, once they leave the teenage class, where do they go? I want to go to that singles class. He said, what's that? Multiply. I don't mean to scare you, but by the end of 2021, ready? 40 Sunday school classes. Breathe. So why? Because if we do what we've always done, we stop multiplying. God's will is that we multiply. But then get this. Why do we do all this? So I want you to notice the progression. He says, be, have some action, fruitful, and multiply. Now, here's the key. He says, be fruitful and multiply and what? Fill. I love that. You know what I found about God? He doesn't like empty. God likes, Brother Means, filled. Luke 14:23. And the Lord said unto the servant, go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be what? Filled. Filled. You know what you ought to do on Sunday night? You ought to bring somebody with you. Why? Fill it up. Where do we go next? Well, we'll go over there and we'll fill that up. What are we going to do next? I don't know. We'll fill it up.
That's right.
Hey, you're just trying to get a big church. No, I'm trying to keep people out of hell. I believe, if I didn't believe what I'm doing, I'm getting out of this. I'm going to get me a regular job where I can make some money, where I go play golf on the weekends. Well, participate in golf. I don't play. But I believe this. I want this place to be filled. It's filled on Sunday morning. Let's fill it on Sunday night. Get this now and filled. 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 You say, you believe this stuff? Absolutely. But it starts with desire. Let me ask you a question. Do you desire for this place to be filled? Do you see it full? I see too much red yet on Sunday nights. I want it filled. I want, before the old timers that I talked about this morning step into heaven's shores, I want them to see this filled, and we have to go to some other place and see it filled over there. I want them to know that the effort that they put into this place is not wasted, that we're going to keep it going. Filled. Do you have desire? Do you have action? Are you continuing? Are you multiplying? Because we cannot get filled until all those things happen. Why do you want all those Sunday school classes? We can fill them all up. We can fill this up. I was walking into the building tonight after the teachers' meeting tonight, walking in the hallway, and I hear all the buzz going on inside of here. I said to myself, that is a great noise.
Amen. That's right.
I mean, I just wanted to stop and record it. I hear happy voices. I hear laughing. I walk inside, I see smiles on faces. We're not getting in fights. Well, we're not getting in fights. You know why? Because we're doing what's right. God, I've read about D.L. Moody, read about J. Frank Norris, read about Lee. I watched Lee Robertson and watched Jack Hiles. God, I like to have the blessings of my ministry like theirs. Okay, you got desire. So I want you to turn it into action, son. Why don't you get some fruit? Once you get some fruit, don't get satisfied. You just become dissatisfied with the amount of fruit and keep on going. Multiply until you fill. Maranatha Baptist Church has seen wonderful growth in 3 years. But if we're done growing, we're dead. It takes everybody. Let's fill this thing. You know, it's always more exciting when it's filled than when it's empty. You ever go to a church and you walk inside of a church on vacation and you look around like, wow. Then you go to a place that's filled, the excitement, the electricity. I want here in the heartland of this country a church where people can come and say, we just want to go visit that place. You realize last week we had people drive an hour and a half to come to church here. Now, if we stop what I'm talking about tonight, they'll stop coming because God will take his hands off. But people are watching. People are coming. They said, man, wow, what's going on? Well, it starts with desire. Get it inside. You get away from the world. You get desire to do right. You start spending time with God. You'll say, I got to have some fruit. Once I have fruit, I got to continue doing it. I want to start multiplying it until we're filled. I'm not going to stop until we're filled. You say, preacher, what if we fill all our buildings? Well, we're not filled yet. We still got a whole field out there. We got 4.5 acres to fill, or about 4 acres to fill. And God, if I have my way, we'll have that field behind us. So you scare me. God scares me. Father, I appreciate these people. But I want this place to be filled, not because of me and not because of any other reason other than I know that's what you want. You told at creation time to fill. You said in the New Testament that my house may be filled. You said in another place that it might be full. You like where you are working, you want it to be full. May we have the same desire, the same vision. May we look at our lives and say, okay, what am I doing to help fill the place? Heads bowed, eyes closed.